while creating certainty. And so that's the whole premise of this. I don't think we're going to need an hour and a half unless we get a really great discussion on the go, but we'll go through it and we'll see where everybody is. It helps if I turn on the thing. So there's my disclaimer that just basically says if I get it wrong, I got it right. You can't call me on it. It's, we did our best though, obviously, to make sure that we got everything as accurate as possible. So the first thing I want to talk about is our wealth accumulator redesign that we did last year. So myself and a few other folks got compiled into a room. We were talking about ways our product hadn't been redesigned really since 2010. It was a direct reverse engineer of Canada Life's award-winning products that they launched. I'm very familiar with those products because I spent almost 13 years with Canada Life working as an advanced case guy with their top-end clients. So I know that product line extremely well. And it truly was a reverse engineer. But the market changed and that product didn't quite fit, so we made some tweaks to it. And the market's always changing and we're always looking at ways to better it. So what you're going to see is a little bit of the highlights of what we did in our redesign and some of the changes that we've just made and just launched, which that noise, with all the noise of what's going on, all of those announcements may have just fallen through the cracks. And then we'll get right into the levelized attacks. And it's important to kind of understand the product because the product it's designed in a way that is very friendly to balance sheets. And that was a lot of the whole crux of everything. So we do have two products. So as I said, we were a direct reverse engineer. So we've got an estate and we've got a wealth. So pretty simple on that one. The estate, you'll see, is that blue line product. It's very thin on cash value in the first 20 years. At which point it typically has a crossover and then it becomes very rich. So if we were dealing with a client that was a doctor, a doctor, a lawyer, a dentist, they may be, depending on what they value and what they do with their money, the majority of the time I would say they'd be more than likely interested in that blue line product because typically they're okay with suffering in the short term to explode and gain big benefits in the later term. They look at it more from an investment standpoint, and running their business is a lot of times where their focus is. If we're dealing with a manufacturer, a car dealer, sometimes an accountant, an engineer, or anybody, developers, folks that do direct investing, folks that have, deploy their own money into opportunities and they can measure that, they know the yields, the sort of yields that they get, then they'll probably be more interested in our wealth style product because it does have that high kickoff of cash value early, and they're willing to give up some of those longer term returns to shore up faster on their balance sheet in the short term. And the way I like it, there's some quirky sayings. I'm second generation in this business, and my father always used to say this, and you've heard this saying a million times, but he used to say it when it came to insurance, and he always sold high early value. And he said, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. And it's like, I'd rather my balance sheet shore up quick today than worry about tomorrow's money. And he always used to say, people are more concerned with their today money than their tomorrow money for the most part. So I found that to be true with a lot of folks, not everybody. You just got to know what it is they value and what the role is they play with how they deploy their money and how they intend to grow their worth. So we did the redesign on this to meet the needs of our high net worth clientele that we find ourselves more and more engaged with. And this was a very big departure for Equitable Life from the standpoint of their market really kind of the redesign or the reverse engineering of Canada's style product was really just mostly mid-market. And then what happened was with Canada Life's dividend scale rate falling down a little bit, we found there was a big shift of people looking at our product, and it started to get us to be able to tell our product around mutuality and why we're different and how we manage money differently. And we've been able to start to niche out and grow that market. And it's one of the fastest segments growing inside Equitable Life, along with we also introduced the national accounts market space, which is your bank-owned firms. So lots of great growth there, but we needed a product that actually hit the mark a little bit better. So one of the big things we did last year was we had to rejig the product so that way it allowed for a lot more deposit room. So if you looked at our last year, like our product before the changes last year, for every dollar of what we call EDO, which is really ADO or plus premium, depending on what contracts you sell, the overfunding, for every dollar of overfunding, now we have probably $3 or $4. So the changes we made added a lot more ADO room, which adds a lot more flexibility to the contract, as hopefully most people know on this. And that becomes important, not so much for return purposes, but for control purposes in the contract. It allows people to get access to more cash early. It allows really for earlier offsets with greater certainty. So it works a lot better with folks that say want to only deposit for 10 years and things like that. And people will buy things on, what we found is people will buy things saying, I want to do this over a finite period of time. But if they're still making money, they may still want to deposit afterwards. So the nice thing is we can create a great amount of certainty with EDO, but still give them all the flexibility that the contract has to offer for 20-pay deposits or life pay deposits. With the changes that we made, we did see a small pullback. So if you were comparing just basic, no EDO or like no additional deposit, you will see that the first 2 years, there's a bit of a pullback on the cash value. So it looks like we dropped out our values for those first 2 years, and we did. By year 3, you're back to where you were, but those first 2 years are what limited all the deposit room. So that's why we had to make a change in that. But if you take a look, we'll take a look at a contract in a second. The contract is structured in that you can get more cash into it, and it can be much more flexible for the client. So the moves we made, giving up those first 2 years, we thought was a worthy, and we didn't give up everything, but if you had a client that was getting, say, 65 cents on the dollar, it went down to like 50 cents on the dollar or 54 cents on the dollar, depending on the age in that. So it really wasn't a big give up for what you could gain. We became much more competitive on the life pay. So we noticed that a vast majority of the large clients that we were going after were buying life pay contracts. Could have been that some of them wanted longer pay duration schedules. Some of them wanted just earlier offsets. And some of them wanted to do the strategy called the immediate finance arrangement, and the life pay just makes a whole lot more sense in that strategy. So we're still competitive on the 20, but we became much more competitive on our life pay. When I say more competitive in older ages, if you have a 65-plus-year-old, Canada Life's probably going to be the deal on that. They're really good. Their pricing's it's really quite good in that older age space. When I say older ages, our target market was like 30 to 55, which works well with the mid-market, but not in the market where we wanted to go with this product. And so we ended up revamping the product. So our target market is really technically 40 to 65, 60, 65. It's, depending, of course, on all the other variables of the case. So extra deposit room, I kind of probably blew these slides just because I talked about all those things. So I'll just kind of skip through this. And there's the older ages. We also we put a new rate band in there. So we didn't have $1 million rate band, so we put that in. There was, with all the good we got, there was also a bit of a takeaway. So we're in a low interest rate environment, and we want to be, we want to be good stewards of people's money and make sure that we're being responsible in our pricing, because that is one of the factors, right? Mortality and pricing and everything is all in there. And so we did increase our ESAs on our joint last to die. So, we're not as competitive as what we were, but we took off some of the pressure on the par fund to be in that space. So we think it was the right thing to do, and that's why we made that change. This is a big one, though. So on our wealth product, we had a 5-year chargeback. So 5 years, just, it scared people, even though, and the funny thing is, some of the folks I work with, they have a near perfect persistency rating. The fact of the matter was, what they felt was they couldn't control whether somebody's business went down. So even though that may not have been a trend in their business, they just didn't like the idea of that hanging over their business, that if somebody's business lapsed within that 5-year period, they were going to have to, pay back that money, and rightfully so. We put that in place because on our wealth contract, within 5 years, a lot of times we're giving back almost all, if not all of the money back to the client. And we may have just started to recoup on the commissions we've paid out. And so it's a big hit to a par fund when you have early terminations on a wealth contract, not just ours, everybody's. So that's the reason why they had that 5-year charge back in there. We just recently got the board to approve a drop on that. So we're 25 months now, which is much more in line with where everybody else is. It is a little bit different, so take a look at it. But, you know, it really, I don't know, it's opened up a lot of folks that were feeling a little bit apprehensive to marketing this product. I'd often get the comment of, I love what you've done with it. I love the values. I love the fact that you're mutual, and I love the like they've seen one of our part. Aaron, you could just shake your head, or I don't know if you're on mute, but has Dave Irwin ever spoke to this group?
Yeah, some of them will have heard Dave speak at different events.
Okay.
Last summer, I had him at the Canada Lakes Golf Club. He's done some one-offs with some of the groups on the line.
Cool. Well, and I'm happy to speak to our par fund because I've gotten very intimate with it. But, you know, Dave's phenomenal because he does make himself available, and you could get Terra Proper as well. And, you know, so they like the way we actually deploy our funds and what we're doing and the size of our account. And they wanted to market us, but that, you know, that 61 months was just a little bit too much for them to take on for that unknown risk. So, and I completely get that. And, you know, we've always honored those relationships, but now we're seeing more of those people coming on board with us and are much more interested in moving our product forward, which is great. So that's all I'm going to say on product. I'm not heavily into the product. I mean, I can talk about product all day. I love it. But I'll leave that to Aaron to beat you up on the product side of things. I'll talk to you a little bit more about the concept, right? And I was asked to give this presentation roughly about a year ago, and it was just about, you know, bolstering ideas for a client's balance sheet, right? And so what I've got here is I've got a male 45. I could have chose different ages. It works fairly much the exact same, but I just chose one, and I randomly chose a deposit. Now, I will say I don't pitch tons on deposit. I'm much more methodical in getting down to what we need. But if somebody wanted to look at, you know, kick the tires on our product and see why they should consider it, I'd probably use something like this. And so I've got a male 45 that's got 100K that we're reallocating from his corporate retained earnings. And he wants to know, what do I get out of that? So if I take a look at this product, I mean, right off the bat, one thing I would want to notice, and this is from one of my mentors, a guy by the name of Dennis Capone Sr., he would say that the water's 3 feet deep. And what he means by that is, or what we mean by that is, that the increase in end of year cash value between year 2 and year 3 is at least or greater than the 100,000 that I'm moving over. So what I'm moving over in cash, I'm now seeing show up at my end of year values. So the water's 3 feet deep from the standpoint of, it was 172 and the next year it's 185. So every time I move money into the account, it's like I'm moving money from one account into another account. The product goes from the red to the black in 5 years. So obviously, most of us on the line will understand this, but effectively what it is once we hit the 5th year, we've put in $500,000, it's worth $500,000 or greater, right? And, you know, even if you look at a -1 or a -2, you'll pretty much be at $500,000 or just slightly over. And that's because par contracts are really made up of mortality gain in the early durations of the contract. So, you know, we can feel very comfortable when we're saying we're going to be balance sheet friendly to somebody by saying by year 5, all the heavy lifting is really done on this product. And with the clients that I get in front of, there's always people always want to know where the trap door or the exit is. So they want to know, how do I melt this thing down and what does it cost me? Well, that's a great way to look at it, because you can see that even in year 4, I've had, you know, $1.8 million plus in coverage for the last 4 years. And it would have cost me just under $7,000 to bail out of this contract. And, you know, obviously we've got to take a look at what the ACB is, which will probably be close to that. But it's probably not the worst financial decision that I've ever made if I've got to melt this down at that time. But typically we know that clients are reallocating portions of their portfolio or some of their retained earnings. So I'm not so worried about that, but clients always like to know, like, what's my meltdown because I bought something and it didn't work out. And then, I'm working on one right now that's, a YRT that was projected to work that doesn't work. And, their meltdown is like super ugly. And here, this is a pretty good story, right? Because, even if we get out to year 10, I've put in $1 million, but I've got just under $1.2 million sitting there. And there will be some tax position on that, but I can get around all that stuff. And let's not forget though, that, this is just looking from a balance sheet perspective of moving money in, money out. But remember, that tells you, like, so just as your bank account pays you what you save plus or minus interest, the life insurance pays you what you meant to save, right? It creates that liquidity, and we've got that CDA benefit, right? So if we can be responsible to their balance sheet with what they're retaining for fixed income, and we can still have liquidity use and control of that while creating certainty for their family with death benefits and the ability to flush that out through capital dividend account, I think it's a great jump off point and probably a great place for them to look at their money. Now, this is not, I would never say, I kind of cringe when I hear life insurance as an investment, and I think the industry thankfully has started to shape and remold that to life insurance as an asset class. And really, I look at life insurance as the and asset from the standpoint of I can have my insurance and still have the liquidity not to miss out on other opportunities, or if I need to repatriate that back into my financial life, into my business, or I need crisis cash or opportunity cash, I have all that ability with this contract. So there were some slides that I had created when I was at Canada Life, and I've had them recreated here. And basically, the reason why I put this in here is, and we're going to get this question a lot coming out of COVID and during COVID when we have talks with people, is people will say, well, how's it going to work now that the world is like, interest rates are lower than what they've, low again. I guess they're not lower than what they've ever been, but they've been lowered once again. And the equity market, took a hammering. So we might have had 20% yields last year, but we've just given all that back, right? And we're just starting to find a balance point in this. Why would I buy this contract now? Like, why should I wait? Should I wait 10 years? Should I wait 5 years and then buy in when we see interest rates starting to rise? And that comes to having a discussion around where they think interest rates are going to go. And so this slide's a nice one just from the standpoint of, if the contract, and the dark blue line is current, and this is showing death benefit, but I have these for cash value as well, and they basically tell the same story. If a client bought today and we did current all the way along, and they're 45, 40 years from now, they'd have $6 million of death benefit. If they bought today, and today we came out and said, we're lowering dividends by 100 basis points. So we're going to take 100 basis points slice out of the dividend scale interest rate. And that 100 basis points is going to hold consistent for the next 10 years. And then we're going to go back to current. So our current dividend scale is 6.2. This is saying from inception, we're going to pay 5.2 for the first 10 years. And then all that's going to happen is the interest rate market rebounded and it went back up to, we held off on increasing it incrementally. We held off and we just went back to current for year 11 forward. What you'll see is that it's really rather a rounding error from death benefit. It works the same way on cash, that the first 10 years is really mostly mortality yield. It's not got anything really to do with investment yield. And so if you think that interest rates are going to go up over the long duration, we should lock in that insurance now because it's going to have minimal effect if you believe interest rates are going to go up. The other thing it does is it locks in your insurability by doing it now. And we have we have longer time to grind down that CDA, depending on how our funding structure works. So it will be a great time to come out of this to buy par, especially high early value par. And I think there's great value. I think that this pause has showed people their lack of savings. And people need insurance, but if we can mix insurance and savings together, so that way we have crisis or opportunity cash down the road, and we know that every 10 years there's some sort of crisis, we end up with a real big winner here. So I think that, when we come out of this, we're going to have the opportunity to sell more par and talk, obviously not right away. People need to shore up their balance sheets and they need to get back in, from the red to the black. So that might take some time. but we can plant seeds, and I think we can come out of this selling more high early par than ever before.
Brent, can I just make a comment on that?
If I said no, would you anyways?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You know that. So one thing that Brent, we'll have these discussions, and what's right for a client, and a client just wants a T to 100, it's pure insurance need, and Brent will often say cash is king. And that really resonated with me recently, because I had a client I was talking to, we were working on a case, and they said they read to me a testimonial they got from their client that they sold Part2 10 years ago right now. And the client just simply reached out to her with an email and said, I just want to note that I'm very thankful that we put this par in place, because I'm looking at all my investments right now, and I'm looking at my cash value in my par fund, and it's the only thing that's standing the test of time right now. And I just really appreciate having that. Luckily, I don't need it, but the fact that it's there is very reassuring. So that kind of really resonated. We talk about it a lot, but there's an example of an advisor getting, a thanks note from their client because this strategy has been in play for about 10 years. And if they needed that money, it's there for them. So that's all.
Yeah, no worries. Hey, listen, roughly 12 years ago, I'm working with a large advisor, Canada Life guy. We're actually going to a Canada Life seminar, but we had left a client appointment, and we get a call come through on his car, and I'm getting the shut your mouth sort of sign from him, and so I do, and it was a client that called him to say, my business, I've just taken a real hit in my business. I'm going around to see where my money's at, because I'm gonna need all hands on deck effectively. And he just says, and this guy sold these contracts way before I was even dealing with him, because he sold these things like 15 years prior to that. And he just said, like how much money do I have with you? And so he said, hold on. And he called his assistant, and his assistant went and got the cash. And he was from the red and into the black. And he said, you got this much, you gave me this much, and this is how much you have. And there was like a silence on the phone. And we all know these stories, right? But like, it's really cool when you see it impact. And he just says, and the guy's name's John. He's like, John, I only wish I had given you more of my money. He's like, because I've called my financial broker, and we're going to have some serious discussions after this is all, once I'm through all of this. But they were able to organize a loan and mobilize that money back right away, like really quick. And that guy's business didn't falter, right? So we all know businesses that are saving cash on their balance sheet, and cash is king, but cash is just really punitive for business owners, right? Because they're getting mugged on rate of return. And then they're getting jacked by the tax man, right? They're paying 51.7. Like, it's offensive, right? Like I make $1 off of my hard-earned money, and I got to ship more of it away in tax than what I get to keep. And so, that's what makes par so exciting, is that one, every time you make a gain, we know it all vests. In fact, somebody recently posted something on LinkedIn talking about that particular thing. So you'll see a lot of par folks kind of pitching this on LinkedIn right now, and rightfully so. They deserve the right, because they did the good work for their clients, right? So the nice thing is you get those vesting points, but you still have all that liquidity, access, and control of your money. And if you're not alive on the planet to use that money, to mobilize it, to take it in retirement, there's a way to flush that out of your corporation and remove an entire layer of tax. So it's just an awesome deal. So here's the idea with Levelize the Tax for corporate fixed income investments. Anybody got any clients that are paying too much in tax on their fixed income? This is good in a room, because then everybody like throws up their hands, nods at me, or like rolls their eyes at me. I'll take it that you did one of those three things. If they're like most business owners, they are. Like, there's no way to get around this one. So for a lot of folks, there's kind of two methods on this, how this gets taken care of. But when we make $1, some folks are withdrawing only what they need to pay in tax, and they're paying off their tax bill. that's owing, right? And so what we're saying is, and then they put the remaining balance back into their fixed income, and that increases the value of their investments over time. And what they're doing, oh, okay, that's not the next slide, but what they're doing is they're increasing their tax liability on an annual basis, right? There is a worse scenario to this, which we see a lot of times, which is people reinvest the entire balance and they're paying the taxes out of other earnings, at which point they're compounding their tax problem annually. So I want to introduce you to an idea here, right? So if I had a client and they had $3,075,000, which seems like a weird number, but I'll break it down for you why we did it this way. So it's $3,075,000 in opening balance sitting in fixed income. So this could be all of the portfolio. This could be a portion of the portfolio, depending on who we're talking to, and this could be scaled. So don't get freaked out by the 3 million number. We all know people that, their pie is much bigger than others, and we know people that, that 3 million could be 1 million. It could be $500,000, right? So the idea is completely scalable. So don't get scared off thinking, oh my, this only works for this. No, it works in a bunch of different scenarios once you understand what their tax rates are and what they have in their investments and why they own those things. So we got a client that got $3,075,000 and they're earning 5%. And I just used 50% because it's easier math for everybody to follow along. So if they earn 5%, that spits out first year $153,000 in interest. They pay away half of it in tax. Their closing balance at the end of the year is $3 million. You can follow the story, but and this is on a 50-year-old. So the example's on a 50-year-old male business owner. As you can see, if you're very balance sheet focused, and I don't know if you folks are balance sheet focused, but being second generation of a planner, balance sheets were very big in our family. In fact, we had to start keeping balance sheets at a very young age. And so if you know the balance sheet game, you start with $3,075,000 and 35 years from now, you pass away and there's $7.3 million sitting there, then you won the balance sheet game, right? Because if you start with 3 million and it grows to be 7 million, you won. But if you look at it that way, what you ignore, and I'm hoping that the little, no little bubble pops up, is that highlighted area, right? Which is the tax that we've transferred away. So if we take a look at the cumulative tax, although the balance is $7 million, we transferred away $4 million of our wealth in tax. And, some people just throw their hands up and say, yeah, well, that's just the way it is. But if there was a way that we could recapture some of that lost money, some of that transferred money, and we could recapture that and bring that back into our family's financial life, would that be of interest to them? And, at this point, usually people are shaking their heads. And so just to, just in case you don't like charts like that, right? We just look at it this way, you started with $3,075,000, it's worth 7.2 at age 85 when you pass away and somebody's coming to collect all that money. And there's been $4.2 million in initial tax payable. And so what we've done by doing this is we've increased our tax bill and we're transferring away our wealth. And what we want to do is say, there's another way that you can pay less tax and recoup that money back into your financial life. And it's called levelize the tax. And so what we do here is, and like we're an insurance company, so I got to plaster this thing with whole life. But I'll tell you, one of my close friends, he's a 7-8 figure earner on an annual basis. In 2016, this drove a lot of his sales, this and the idea of backing it with an IFA. And what he would do is, as he was explaining it, he called it the other room. And he'd give all the attributes of what the other room was all about, but he just wouldn't call it whole life to taint the sale or to taint the discussion going forward. He would eventually tell them whole life, and everybody knows he's a life insurance guy. But so what I want to do is talk to you about taking a portion of your winnings off the table. So we're going to hold your investment advisor accountable for creating yield. And we're going to take the winnings after we pay the taxes, and we're going to put that in this other room. And what we're going to get is we're going to get tax deferral, we're going to get growth. We're going to get a multiplier. So if you're not here to enjoy it, we promise we'll pay out way more to your family. And we don't have to lose our liquidity use and control of that money along the way. So typically what we're doing is rebalancing the fixed income part of the portfolio. And what I would say is, depending on the type of client, it might all be fixed income. So if I'm dealing with the manufacturers, car dealers, they take a lot of their risk in their business, and they bet on themselves, and they know their metrics, and they know their yield. So they won't put it in other things. If I'm dealing with a doctor or a dentist, it's very common that I'll see total like portfolios, well-rounded things. So a lot of times what we're doing is just reallocating a portion of the fixed income. Here, what I'm doing is I'm not even reallocating the portfolio. The first talk is, can I do better with the annual winnings? And so when I start out here, you'll notice my starting balance in the investment is $3 million. That's totally by design, and that's because we pay life insurance annually up front, right? So the first 75 grand goes over to paying for the first premium, right? So we put the first 75,000 into the other room, and the $3 million is sitting there for your investment broker to still earn you your 5% on the bonds that he's been selling you. So if we do that, that produces $150,000, of which 75 gets transferred away in tax, and 75,000 we're going to put in the other room, and the closing balance is 3 million. So if we just don't take a look at the other room and we just looked at this model, we would see two things. One, we would see that our tax bill went from $4.2 million, so $1.6 million less, down to 2.6. So I managed to pay less in tax. That's great. But if I look at this, and this is my balance sheet, and I ignore the other room, it's a fail to me, right? Because I started with 3 million, I ended with 3 million. So what do I get? Like, Swadok, I paid less in tax, but what do I get by transferring my money into that other room? Well, this is what you get, right? And yes, this one's the corrected one. And so what you see is 75,000 goes into the other room. I've got a growing pot of cash. So I still have the liquidity, use, and control of that money, which I can then repatriate back in my business if I need, if I have a real estate deal on the horizon, if somebody's business is faltering and I want to inject cash in there and take control of some of their shares. I've got a lot of opportunity here with that cash. So it's not a dead asset on my balance sheet. And in times like this, people want to know, like, what's the value of a dollar that you can't get access to? So if I lock it up in something, I can't get access to it, and I lose the opportunity, that could be worth a lot to me. So depending on what people value and how active they are in putting their money into deals and opportunities, this can become a very solid vehicle for them. The other thing we get with this is we get an immediate kicker of over $1 million of insurance. And so what you'll see is that insurance is going to continue to grow. And this is kind of what the results end up looking like when we mash it all together. So in the, we're going to pay $1.6 million less in tax. So we reduce the tax payable or the wealth transferred by 38%. And in the investment, you'll remember I had a balance of 7.2. Well, in the balance of the $3 million plus the $6 million in life insurance proceeds that are there, if I pass away and I don't get to enjoy this money, it's $9.6 million. So I'm going to transfer 38% less away in tax and increase my overall position by 32% while still having liquidity, access, and control to that money. So if this is all we did, a lot of times this is enough to speak to them to say, well, that's just taking some of the winnings off the table. There's this whole thing about passive investment rules and the grind down that's going to have on my small business deduction. Maybe we should start reallocating some of this portfolio. And I heard an individual talk at roughly, I guess it was the end of last year, about the small business deduction thing. And they were like, it's really a push. Like, you're going to pay more tax now, but then you get these eligible dividends later. So the dollars in, dollars out's the same. And I'm like, yeah, but it's the opportunity cost on their money in between that you've lost, that they're transferring away a bunch of their wealth. And they're probably doing it unknowingly. So this just really kind of highlights that, but this is only part of the kicker. The next slide really shows the value of what we do. It's what makes us so darn cool, which is getting that money out through the capital dividend account results in 57% more value to the heirs by restructuring their fares this way. So that 7.2 million, almost 7.3 million, after RDTOH and everything else, ends up grinding down to 5.4 million net to the heirs, where the 3 million plus the 6 million, so some of that comes out through CDA, some of that comes out with RDTOH, ends up being 8.5, 57% better off having reallocated my affairs, so that way I levelize the tax and I'm able to recapture that wealth and create a better scenario for my family. So what does that mean? Well, if all I wanted to do was go back to $5 million, there's nothing stopping him from spending that $3 million in his lifetime, right? There's nothing stopping him from spending down other assets worth $3 million. Maybe I've got a nice house and I want to leverage on that, because I can leverage on that in personal name, and that incurs absolutely no tax, doesn't need a dividend, doesn't need me to pledge things personally, corporately, pay guarantee fees and all that other stuff. Now, all that stuff's still on the table available to me, but it leaves me with more choices and more options. And if there's one thing we know, nobody of any serious wealth or business owners want to be painted into a corner where there's no choices and no options. So this is just a really good conversational way to talk about that. Since the launch of this, we actually launched a calculator at the end of last year, which constantly keeps getting revamped, but it shows the idea of reallocating a portion of the assets along with the ongoing projected retained earnings. And it will, on like a 2-pager sort of thing, show them the net effect that's going to have to their heirs. And so, what's the benefits to your clients? Well, not that anybody's ever asked to levelize to recapture tax, but obviously levelizing helps them recapture that tax. They get an immediate bump to their estate. So if their feet aren't on the planet, we're helping replace that economic life value of that individual, or we're creating or conserving his estate. We're able to accumulate more wealthy in this contract, so we're giving up some of that delayed cash value stuff to be able to shore up faster, so that way we have more liquidity access and control to that money. And really the insurance protection is that immediate increase to the estate. So I guess we just thought 4 was a better number than 3. So that's the basis of the idea. I have some, it's not a case study really so much in this, but it is a case study with our high early value product that I'll share with you. And it was kind of a cool story. So it's a doctor case. I'm really formal here. It's a doctor case. It's a female 31 non-smoker. She's a medicine professional. She's got a corporation. She currently retained a bunch of dough. She's retaining like 90K. She's a good saver. She's probably a good saver because her father's an engineer. He also happens to be the advisor on this case. She's pretty much moderately balanced portfolio inside of her corporation. She owned an older UL for $1 million. She had an estate. She had just bought actually an estate builder from her father for like $15K annually, which they were looking at for IRP purposes. And then, she's having a child, so they wanted to top up another $500,000 in T3065 because they felt that what they had was like sufficient coverage. I thought they were well underinsured, but that's not my argument to have. But he wanted to meet with me because he was just putting in place the estate builder. He wanted to first meet with me really just to talk about should she buy it personally, should she buy it corporately. So we were talking about that and I was understanding a little bit. And then he told me about this term he was selling her. And I should probably just say thank you when people show me stuff like that. But then my mind starts to kick into overdrive thinking, does this make sense? And would I buy this? And, so when we talked about purchasing personally or corporately, it doesn't make sense for her to incur a whole bunch of taxes paying the money out when the money's sitting in the corporation. And we know that, we can flush that out later. And we know that her corporation isn't saleable. So, it totally makes sense to buy it where the money is, right? Like I can't remember who's saying it was, but why do you rob banks? Because where the money is. In this particular case, why do we put it in her medicine professional corporation? Because it's where the money is, and it made good sense. But my bigger question was, and that I was asking him was, does buying term insurance make sense for this client? Like it's a loser if she doesn't die. It's cheap. I'm not arguing it's not cheap, but it's a loser if she doesn't die. And so, I want them to understand that, yes, okay, buying corporately makes a ton more sense, right? So if I'm in that low corporate rate, it costs me a lot less to pay that premium and to make that deposit. So this just kind of supports that. If I need $1,000 premium, and I'm in a top tax bracket, that would cost me $2,000 a year versus, $1,100 corporately at 12.5% rate. So I don't think I'll get too much of an argument on that one. And what I want to talk to him about is, they've already bought into the idea as life insurance as an asset class in the overall portfolio of the corporation. But I want to talk to him about not using the term and why using the permanent life insurance for growth, tax treatment, access if they need it, and distribution makes a whole ton more sense than buying that cheap term insurance, which, listen, I don't have a problem with people owning term, but in this particular case, given what she was doing with her money, didn't make a ton of sense to me. And so, as I said, she's moderately fixed income balanced portfolio. What I want to talk about is moving that fixed income stuff into the permanent life insurance. And although they're doing that for long-term value right now, I want to talk to them about bolstering up their balance sheet here. And so, I kind of just went through this case and I just said, she's 31 years old. And what I did was I went in and I saw how much does $500,000 of our wealth product at that time, how much does a maxed out version of that cost? And it was, I rounded it out to $17,500. By the way, if somebody wants to buy $500,000, for negotiation purposes, don't round out. Actually, odd numbers makes the deal seem less contrived, believe it or not. But anyways, it was easier for comparative sake. That's why we used it. So what I'm going to do is in my first column, I'm saying, she's got the money. And if she was putting that, if her fixed income was producing a 4% return, here's what her account would look like, right? And so I'm just looking at the 4% after tax every year, kind of building up in the account. And then in my next column, I've got my T3065. And like I said, it was really chicken feed the cost, right? Because it's $487. So it's really cheap. And if I just look at that and then factor in the idea that if I don't claim on it, I'm not only losing the $487, but I'm losing the 4% that I could have been earning on it. So term plus lost opportunity cost. And I would argue even that the lost opportunity cost is if we canceled this or it was after age 65, we should be factoring in the $500,000 that we never got a payout on, right? But we'll save that for another day. And so the next columns over is our wealth accumulator, right? So if we take a look at year 3, the water's 3 feet deep, even for this client, right? So we're growing by more than the 17,000 that she's transferring into the contract. And by year 5, yes, I highlighted in the blues year 5. By year 5, we go from the red to the black. And from that point forward, we never look backwards, right? The account's always growing greater by what we put in every year. And I'm ahead every year thereafter. But from a death benefit perspective, if you take a look, so let's even go 5 years out, the differential is $320,000 from the 500 we bought to what the paid up additions are showing on current, right? Well, if she had just bought the term and invested the difference and she passed away, coming into the corporation would be $92,000 plus the $500,000. So I'm ahead from an estate perspective at every duration. And sorry, I missed some stuff that I know was in another presentation. What I did was I started to show when the break-evens were, so you can follow it along and take a look, right? Like you can see where the cash value break-evens against the 4% account. And what you'll see is that I end up better in almost every duration. And so, and remember, this guy was an engineer, so he was a little bit more analytical, and that's why I built a spreadsheet like this, was to show him that, I'm completely better off doing this model than what I am going into the, buy term and invest the difference model here. And they didn't lose that liquidity, access, and control, and they were thinking about buying a building. And so what we talked about was all the ways that they could mobilize that money. And I mentioned earlier that the idea of the and asset, there's a book written out of the States called The And Asset, so you're more than welcome to purchase that. Explains how whole life works. But you've got to know the differences between the United States and Canada for tax purposes. But I often say this with clients is there are or investments, and then there's the and asset. So most everything that you're going to touch and make decisions on are an or investment. So I can put my money in the real estate or in the GIC, or in the stock portfolio, or into the index portfolio, into the mutual fund, or into a building, into another business, or. Life insurance is the only thing that I can put my money into the life insurance and create the certainty of the liquidity and capital that my estate's going to need or my income replacement's going to require. And I don't have to miss out on that other opportunity. So it's the idea of taking it and using it for leverage, right? Either repatriating it direct through policy loan or taking it out through the IFA methodology, right? And we're not going to spend a ton of time here on IFA, but it's understanding where that fits and what clients that fits with. And when we have clients that make their own decisions and they actually put together their own deals, IFA can make a ton of sense for those clients. And a lot of times they've looked at life insurance, but they haven't moved forward with it. And it's typically because they're running the IRRs in their head and they know they can do better, right? Like I can't argue with a guy that says, I'm used to getting, I was dealing with the end of last year. I was dealing with a lot of like private finance guys, and they were getting like 12% on mortgages, 8% on mortgages. I can't argue that. Over the long duration, if you could keep doing that, you're right. You're going to outperform me. Obviously that doesn't include getting it out of the corporation and all that stuff, but that's what they're looking at. They're sizing it up that way. And if there was a way they could do both, and it only costs them the spread difference in the middle, and if they don't need the money right away because they don't have a deal on the horizon, they could build that up and it doesn't have all the negative tax effects to it, then we typically have more room for discussion. And this is pitching an idea. And I got to tell you, I'm like not really a pitch guy. I'm more of like get down and do planning guy and really get to know where people want to go from a blue ocean strategy perspective. Like I want to know what